Today we're here in Silicon Valley to talk to a man who played an integral role in the development of one of the most influential items of the 20th century, the iPod. After leaving Apple, he went on to co-found Nest Labs, which he later sold to Google. His name is Tony Fadell, and today we're talking watches. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Could you tell us a little bit about how you got into watches, product design, a little bit about your background?
Watches for me, I just remember my grandfather having them, and he had his one prized one he wore all the time, nothing special. I always was curious about them, but they really didn't affect me. And I didn't really wear a watch until I came out to Silicon Valley in the early 90s. And I just started taking notice to them because I was always like, oh, what's this oddity? And I would be in design shops, not in jewelers, not in watch shops, but I was in design shops. And that's when I first noticed a watch that would look different than everyone else, and that was really this iPod. It just was different looking. And I was like, wow, that's cool, and put it on, and I was like, whoa, these things are expensive. I didn't know, I was into my 20s at the time. I was like, what's so special about it? But it was like that design, and it just resonated with me. It was non-traditional, the strap itself, the kind of UFO look, the colors. This is really the one that kind of got me into thinking about watches more and more.
Sure, and so that watch in particular, it attracted you because of the aesthetics.
It was almost purely the aesthetics,
right.
And and the quality and feel and everything else. And she said, I want something that is different than the norm that I saw my grandfather and my father wore.
You once told me that you only buy automatic watches, or you only really like to buy automatic watches.
Well, I only really like to. You'll find some discrepancies here, but really for me, I got to learn about first the design of watches, and then I got curious about the mechanics. And so I started to look at watches from that viewpoint of both style and function mechanically as well as production.
So what was it about the Panerai that attracted you?
Look, at the end of the day, just the simplistic styling. This is the 1950s reissue, and I went all the way to Florence on my honeymoon, and I went to the first store. It is so classic. If you look at the beauty on the mechanicals, as well as just the face, the double layered face, the luminous markings, the gold tone hands with the strap. Back then, there were no big watches. They were all smaller watches in 99, 2000. And I was just like, this was design, execution, everything, just to get that bubble lens the way it is now, and just so beautiful from the side angle. Even though it's large, I was just blown away.
And what was it about the Monaco that attracted you?
Well, the Monaco, look, it's probably one of the very first sport watches, right? It was the first kind of breakaway from the traditional watch setting, but then it also had the chrono. It had an automatic. It was one of those, to me, incredibly interesting design, just from the flat surfaces and everything. So, to me, that was kind of like the beginning of a new era in watches. People start looking at them as not just this classical piece, but something that can be used for certain time frames. Like, I'm going to wear it where I'm racing, or I'm going to do it when I'm doing other sports. For me, that was really what was so amazing about this watch.
And this Patek, what is this?
So this is the 5250. It may look like, any kind of typical Patek, but if you flip it over, this is actually the advanced research that has the Sylvan escapement. Right? And so I live in the world of silicon all day long. And when silicon came to the watches, because of its thermal coefficients, its friction coefficients, those kind of things, I said I had to have this, right? Automatic, yes, very automatic, a brilliant brand, and very few were made, right? And so this was really about the cutting edge of what the next watches could look like. And now you're seeing more and more silicon being added to watches, not smart watches, but to mechanical watches. And I think you're going to see more of that over time.
And you look for movements that actually do have some sort of mechanical innovation.
I try to. One watch that I really would love to get my hands on is the Cartier ID Concept 2.
Right, which they're not actually making.
Which they're not actually making, that I'm pounding on the door for them to make, but they haven't done it yet. But if you look at that innovation, it's design, style, it's got everything going for it. I hope one day I'll be able to acquire one of those.
And while we're on Patek, so explain to us the appeal of this Nautilus.
Oh, well, the Nautilus, how can I say? I started out looking at larger watches. This one, was one of those thin watches. After weighting down my wrist and everything, I was like, this was my first step to going back thin. So that was one thing that was really important to me. This watch is my go-to watch. This is probably my everyday watch. I can wear it regardless of the type of outfit. It wears so well, and it is beautiful. It is not your typical, round watch. It's not a square watch or a rectangular watch. It's got its own unique feel. For me, that is just a classic.
So while we're on Patek, we have to talk about this boy right here. This is a big bad boy right there. So this is a 5208P.
5208P.
So this is a minute repeater, perpetual calendar,
Perpetual calendar.
mono pusher chronograph.
Mono pusher.
So this is a serious watch. What was it about this watch that really brought you in?
I've collected a few grand complications, but this one is the first one that you can wear every day if you wanted to. It doesn't have that appeal of the classic grand complication of Patek. When I look at something like the Monaco and you go to this, it has that sport styling. It has the younger styling. I'm getting older, so nothing like, maybe it's my midlife crisis watch. And just, knowing the craftswork that goes into these things. About 3 years for one artisan to make. You have to appreciate that.
You do wear this watch. You wear it
Oh,
all.
I do wear that watch. I don't wear it as much as I wear this, but I do wear that watch.
You might be the only owner of a 5208 that really wears that watch.
Look, this is what these are for. You have to wear them.
Yeah.
That's what they're made for. This is one of those watches was like, okay, when we sold the company to Google and, we're happy here at Google and everything, this was one of those milestones. It's those kind of things where you go, okay, you kind of splurge a little bit and you kind of go overboard.
And another brand that we see a little bit in your collection is Lana. And it seems like Silicon Valley guys are getting into Lana a little bit. Is this true?
Without a doubt. It's up and coming. It's still one of those very small manufacturers that really looks at the mechanics and the overall styling. And they're highly sought after because there's very few of them. This is the Phantom, right? And to have that luminous dial, right? And to have the see-through dial, and there's a reason for it, right? So it's digital, like Silicon Valley, we're digital guys, right? But then also the technology of getting those numerals charged for the night. It's gorgeous, like all Lana products, but just this dial alone and the digital readout. This is another one of those turns in the watch business where people are like, okay, it's a milestone.
And something a little bit more kind of off the beaten path. This is a Renaissance. And this is not a Type 1, this is a Type 3.
Type 3.
Yeah. And so tell me about this watch. Why do you like it?
Truth be told, the products that I make, we usually have touchscreens, or I used to make touchscreens on top of displays. And you would get just like most watches, you get the air gap, right, between the crystal and the readout. And what you'd find is you get parallax, right? You get parallax because of the refractive changes. So back in '91, I was trying to figure out how to make touchscreens work really well on top of displays, and we were starting to oil fill them. So in the lab, we were putting oil between the layers to kill the refractive differences. And my God, it felt like the display popped up to the top surface. And so when I saw the picture and then I read what they were doing, right, about oil filling the mechanism, I was like, I know instantly what that would look like, and I placed my order immediately. It's that trick of putting the oil and getting the numerals just to come out all the way to the face. That's amazing.
Right.
But then they went beyond and they said, let's get rid of the crown. Let's get rid of all of the ways you interact typically with a watch and throw those all away and try something different. And for me, that's what this is.
And then what do we have here?
This is the 101. It's the world's smallest mechanical movement. I think there's a real missed opportunity for most watch manufacturers when it comes to really talking to women. This is one of the designs that actually is very feminine and has a great mechanism. To me, this is where the industry should be going. It shouldn't be worrying about putting baguettes on men's designs, right? They put pave diamonds in it. It's just to me garish. If you can go back and think about all the things that women wear, there's so much opening for creative design that this is one of the watches that speak to that.
So the iPod, you played a big role in the origins of the iPod. You one time told me that you had the idea of offering the iPod to somebody else, or something like an iPod to somebody else.
Yes.
Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. Back in the late 90s, 99 and 2000, I had a startup company, and which would then become the iPod. We were looking at portable devices. So Palm at the time had the Palm Pilot and those kinds of things, and I was making competitive products. Well, I really wanted to make a music product. So I pitched it like a Palm Pilot for music to Palm, and they said no. I'm like, oh, well, maybe that's because they're very utilitarian and they didn't really appreciate music. So then the next call that I did was with Swatch. So Yves Bahar, he's a great designer, knew Nicholas and said, hey, I know this guy, Tony, you might want to talk to him about music players. So Nicholas said, okay, and this is senior. It's like, okay, I'll take the call. And I was on the phone with him and talking to him. And he's like, what is this thing? What is that? We only make watches. I don't know. And, it all fell apart then, but so be it. I think we landed in a great place at Apple.
And so as an ex-Apple employee, I have to ask, what do you think of the Apple Watch?
Well, I've only spent a few moments with it with my friends from Apple who've shown it to me. So the jury's out for me. I haven't had time to really play with it. So I don't have much to say except, okay, there's probably some interesting things, and the guys I know who are leading it are interesting and smart guys, so I can't wait to try it out and really figure out if it really fits in my life. It's going to have to compete against these.
So now as an employee of Google, are you working on the Tag Heuer product as well?
Because I'm a watch lover, I try to get my nose into all kinds of things that we're doing on wearables at Google and things. So people consult with me on various things, and I'm more than happy to lend my 2 cents. There's so many different fractures of these smartwatches, whether it's a fitness band that has some time, or it's a watch that has some fitness, or it has more smartphone things. I think we're seeing a lot of change going on in the industry, and people are not quite sure what's going on. What's going to happen at the end of this? I don't know. Jury's out. It seems like it's very early days. I think all of them have the one issue that they have to deal with is battery. All of them have battery life issues. I think that's going to be a big issue for people to overcome. What's the trade-off of function versus annoyance of using it every day?
20 years, 30 years down the road, the Swiss watch industry, will it be in the same state that it is today, or will it really be impacted by digital wearables?
I would say that, if you look at these are, some of these at least, they are in a very pinnacle of those brands. There's lots of brands below them, I think, that are going to suffer. Mm-hmm. I think many of these are going to do very well still, because they're not going to be commodity. They're going to still be handmade, and if they continue to add either more silicon, mechanical silicon, not electronic silicon, or some of these other design elements, I think they're going to do quite well. Most people today don't wear watches. And so it's very interesting for me to see the younger folks getting on board, and the older folks are the ones who are pulling them in, because like, did you learn about this? Did you learn about it? Or they have access to great sites like yours to learn more about it and appreciate it. So I think that there's a whole new generation that is growing up that is looking at this as a very, very different way of what watches are and what they could be. And they're appreciating it. And they're seeing that the smartwatch isn't everything. Right. That there's some other great craftsmen out there and been there for years, and they're embracing it, and they see it as a matter of style and function and design aesthetic.